Hi, I'm Melissa, and welcome to this month's live from at the Reagan Library. Remember, we do these on the first Wednesday of every month. So this month's episode is going to be a little bit unorthodox. Because of COVID-19, like most of the businesses across the country, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library Museum is closed to the public until further notice. But we wanted to find a way to still bring you the museum galleries while not even being there. We came across this great quote from Ronald Reagan, which reads, "I believe we have the talent and the capacity to solve whatever problems we might face." So we decided what we were going to do was actually produce a video. So we're going to give you a voiceover walkthrough of the Reagan Museum, a virtual tour if you may, using photos and video we already have at the library, and a quick shout out to all of our social media followers. We also are including a handful of photos and video our guests have sent in to us over the years, so if you follow us on social media, thank you so much for that. On November 4th, 1991, at the grand opening of the Reagan Library, President Reagan said,
"The doors of this library are open now, and all are welcome. The judgment of history is left to you, the people. I have no fears of that, for we have done our best. And so I say, come and learn from it."
So, welcome to the Reagan Library.
When visitors enter our museum, they are greeted by a great statue of President and Mrs. Reagan, sculpted by famed American artist Chaz Fagan. The statues are just a bit taller than President Reagan's height of 6'1" and Mrs. Reagan's height of 5'4", and it's a great place to take a quick family photo. Ronald Reagan once said, "I'm reminded of my parents' teachings, that in the end, everything works out for the best, and that individuals determine their destiny through their own ambition and hard work." Here you'll learn information about his childhood, his family, including his mother Nellie, his father Jack, and his brother Neil. From his father, Ronald Reagan learned self-reliance and to dream big dreams. From his mother, he learned that everything in life, even setbacks, happens for a purpose. At both of Ronald Reagan's presidential inaugurations, he placed his left hand on this Bible and swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States. He also used it for both swearings in as governor of California. The Bible belonged to his mother and contains her handwritten notes inside. Here you'll also see some of his high school and college memorabilia, including his high school yearbook, essays he wrote in high school, his Letterman sweater and blanket from Eureka College, and photos of his time as a lifeguard at Lowell Park Beach. Fresh out of college, Ronald Reagan landed a job in radio through an unusual audition. A program manager at WOC in Davenport, Iowa, hired him after he improvised the play-by-play commentary of an imaginary football game. He soon moved to a larger station, WHO in Des Moines, as the staff sports announcer. Ronald Reagan once said, "To say that I wanted to be a movie star would have been as eccentric as saying I wanted to go to the moon. But I had an idea to start in radio." Ronald Reagan never gave up his secret dream of becoming an actor. As an announcer for the Chicago Cubs, he talked the team into bringing him along to spring training on Catalina Island, off the Southern California coast. In April 1937, an old acquaintance in Los Angeles introduced him to an agent, who helped arrange a screen test. A few days later, back in Iowa, he had a telegram offering him a contract with Warner Brothers. "I packed everything I owned into a Nash convertible that I'd already bought for $600 and headed for California," he once wrote. A quick side note, on a clear day you can actually see Catalina Island from the hilltop at the Reagan Library. Visitors to the Reagan Library can look at some of his movie scripts and costumes, as well as watch some of his movie trailers. During his first 18 months in Hollywood, Ronald Reagan had small roles in 13 films. Ironically, his first role was a radio announcer in Love Is on the Air. He lobbied hard for the part of George Gipp in the film Newt Rockne All-American, released in 1940. It became his best-known role and opened the door to more and better parts. The film also left him with the nickname The Gipper, which followed him the rest of his life. He made over 50 films in all and enjoyed enough success to buy a ranch and a home for his parents in California. And in a very fun, interactive, guests can also, using green screen technology, act in a movie with Ronald Reagan, call a Chicago Cubs game, or announce a General Electric theater. As an actor, Ronald Reagan became a member of the Screen Actors Guild, making him the only U.S. president to have been a member of a union. Later, as president of the Screen Actors Guild, Ronald Reagan received an education in the struggle for power. After World War II, supporters of international communism tried to expand their influence in Hollywood, partly by gaining control of unions. Ronald Reagan led the Screen Actors Guild in fighting the communist influence. His stand brought threats of violence, and the experience left him with a lifelong dislike for the tactics of international communism. But his talks with studio heads and the bitter labor struggle helped him develop invaluable leadership and negotiating skills. In the fall of 1949, Ronald Reagan later recalled, "I received a phone call that was to change my life and enrich it forever." An actress named Nancy Davis asked him for help. She was worried about being confused with another actress of the same name who had a connection to communist friend groups. They met for dinner to discuss the problem, and both claimed to have an early casting call in case the dinner did not go very well. They ended up staying out half the night. Within a few months, they dated only each other and were married on March 4, 1952. In the early years of their marriage, Ronald Reagan became a spokesperson for General Electric. He traveled to factories across the country as their goodwill ambassador, sharing messages of taking initiative, the perils of big government, and the strength of private enterprise. Ronald Reagan often said that it was this time on the road that got him ready for politics. And as he traveled, he wrote and sent love letters to his wife. In 1966, California faced serious problems. Ronald Reagan won the governorship of California with a simple, consistent philosophy. He championed economic freedom, smaller government, fewer regulations, and lower taxes. Known as the Great Communicator, Ronald Reagan sought wisdom from a wide-ranging set of political figures, philosophers, novelists, and poets, including Abraham Lincoln, Daniel Webster, John F. Kennedy, and Thomas Jefferson. As he came across quotes that he liked, he would meticulously handwrite them on 4x6 note cards, recording his favorite sayings, jokes, asides, and timeless nuggets of political wisdom. It's believed that Ronald Reagan started the notes collection when he was serving as spokesperson for General Electric from 1954 to 1962. As the years progressed, note cards were written on personal stationery cards he used as Governor of California, and as President of the United States on White House cards. In 2010, the Reagan Library was under renovation and timed to reopen for the centennial of President Reagan's birth on February 6, 2011. Looking for new artifacts to put on display in the library, a cardboard box marked only in pen with RR's desk on its side was located within the archives. There was no label on it. It was randomly stashed among boxes of assorted Reagan memorabilia. These were the personal belongings he had kept in his desk until his death in 2004. The treasured notes were held among a mass of rubber bands and paper clips. All of the one-liners were maintained in a fat stack of cards with a rubber band around them. They were separate from the rest of the collection. Whenever the president heard or invented a joke that he deemed a keeper, he'd carefully write it out on a 4x6 note card and insert it in this stack. These original note cards are on display at the Reagan Library. You can also purchase a book called The Notes, which includes many of the quotations, proverbs, and one-liners found within the note cards. You can buy it through our museum store online simply at reaganlibrary.com/store. After unsuccessfully running for the presidency in 1976, Ronald Reagan ran again in 1980, winning in a landslide. Ronald Reagan won the popular vote by 10 percentage points and took 44 of the 50 states. We call this gallery the Victory and Inauguration Gallery. Now, most presidents are judged on their first 100 days in office, but this gallery only focuses on his first 70 days in office. Why? Because on the 70th day, he was shot. We'll get more on that later. Through the use of Ronald Reagan's White House schedule and personally handwritten diary entries, the president's first 70 days are examined, including trips he took and speeches he delivered. This gallery also contains the suit President Reagan wore as he took the oath of office on January 20, 1981, as well as the wool ensemble designed by Adolfo that Mrs. Reagan wore. This gallery also includes a replica of the Blue Goose podium the president uses while delivering his speeches, including his inaugural remarks. This is the exact photo of President Reagan delivering his speech, but we've stripped him out. Guests at the Reagan Library can step behind the podium and deliver his remarks, which are scrolling on teleprompters, while Mrs. Reagan, Vice President Bush, and President Carter cheer you on. Then, on March 30th, 1981, President Reagan delivered an address to the building and construction trades at the Washington, D.C. Hilton Hotel. Following the speech, as he stepped through the hotel exit door, he was shot. John Hinckley Jr. fired 6 shots in only a few seconds during the attempt on President Reagan's life. On hearing the shots, Secret Service agent Jerry Parr pushed President Reagan into the armored presidential limousine. But a bullet ricocheted off the vehicle and struck the president. The flattened bullet hit a rib, passed through the president's lung, and stopped less than an inch from his heart. Although no one knew it at the time, President Reagan's condition was extremely grave as he entered the hospital. That day, he lost more than half his blood. President Reagan wore this blue suit for the first time on the day he was shot. At George Washington University Hospital, it was cut from his body as doctors searched for wounds. This chest X-ray of President Reagan shows just how close the bullet came to his heart. With Mrs. Reagan and their daughter Patty at his side, President Reagan left George Washington University Hospital wearing this red sweater on April 11, 1981. When President Reagan returned to the White House, he went straight back to work. As Ronald Reagan recovered in the White House, he decided that the time had come to try to transform U.S. relations with the Soviet Union. President Reagan composed a letter and sent it to Soviet leader Brezhnev, trying to reassure him that the United States had no territorial ambitions around the world, but would not ignore Soviet aggression. Brezhnev rejected President Reagan's attempts at personal diplomacy, but it was an approach the president would try again with other Soviet leaders with great success. The Oval Office is a symbol of the American presidency. In addition to a working office, the historic space is where presidents welcome foreign dignitaries and special guests. This room is an exact replica of the Oval Office during the second term of the Reagan presidency. The sculpture and other decor used here and throughout the West Wing reflected Ronald Reagan's love of the West. The chair behind the desk is the actual chair he used for all 8 years as California governor and all 8 years as President of the United States. On his desk he had 2 plaques, both of which are very true to his can-do optimistic spirit. It can be done, and there's no limit to what a man can do or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit. As guests exit our Oval Office replica, they move toward the East Room of the White House. The elegant setting of the Reagan White House was the setting for state dinners, diplomatic receptions, holiday celebrations, and other prestigious events. In this gallery, you'll find our interactive state dining table, where you can explore 32 menus from actual state dinners during the Reagan administration, and even read the toasts from the guests of honor. Over 8 years, Ronald Reagan kept a daily diary in which he recorded his thoughts on the extraordinary, the historic, and the routine day-to-day occurrences of his presidency. These diaries demonstrate his trademark wit, political acumen, and human compassion, providing a unique insight into the character of a true American leader. On display are 2 of the 5 diaries he filled, as well as a digital display where you can virtually flip through his entire diary by date or by theme. In Mrs. Reagan's gallery, visitors learn what the White House experience meant to Nancy Reagan, both as a First Lady and the wife of the 40th President. This gallery includes cases which showcase her childhood, from her christening gown and bonnet to her high school yearbook and childhood photos. Of course, it wouldn't be a First Lady gallery without showcasing some of the dresses she wore over her 8 years. These dresses periodically change out, so you might see something new the next time you visit. Mrs. Reagan once said, "With the exaggerated ups and downs of life at the White House, I found what is really important to me. I learned how to serve." And serve she did. From her foster grandparents program to her momentous Just Say No to Drugs campaign, Mrs. Reagan made a big difference in our world. As guests depart Mrs. Reagan's gallery, they enter a colonnade which connects our main Reagan Museum to our Air Force One Pavilion. As guests step into the pavilion, the first word we often hear is wow. Air Force One tail number 27,000 is mounted on pedestals at a 2-degree upwards tilt, so that when you're on the plane, it feels like it's about to take off. Guests get to walk around the entire plane, enter and walk through the plane, and then go onto our second floor and walk beneath the belly of the plane. The plane is a Boeing 707 and served 7 U.S. presidents from 1972 until 2001. Over its time in use, the plane flew over 1 million miles, of which President Reagan used the plane for 660,000 of those miles, traveling to 26 foreign countries and countless cities across the United States. When walking through the plane, guests get to see the cockpit, the front galley that served President and Mrs. Reagan, the communications center, President Reagan's stateroom, which is the only seatbelt in the entire plane with the presidential seal on it, Mrs. Reagan's stateroom, the boardroom, the staff room, the guest room, the area for Secret Service, and the area for Air Force crew and members of the media, and the rear galley. When you come off the plane, you move to our pavilion's second floor, where you get to explore a portion of a presidential motorcade, including the 1983 Cadillac presidential parade limousine used by President Reagan, the 1986 Chevrolet Suburban used as a follow-up car by the United States Secret Service, and 1985 Los Angeles Police Department vehicles, which are examples of vehicles used when President Reagan visited Los Angeles. On our bottom floor, guests get to tour through the Sikorsky VH-3A helicopter, which was designated as a Marine One helicopter in 1967. It was later retired in 2004. This Marine One serviced Presidents Johnson, Nixon, and Ford. In fact, this is the exact helicopter that flew President Johnson from Andrews Air Force Base to the White House after Air Force One flew President Kennedy's body back from Texas after he was assassinated. President Johnson got off Air Force One, held a short press conference, then got on this Marine One to go to the White House. In June of 1984, President Reagan traveled to Ireland for a diplomatic mission. While there, he and Mrs. Reagan visited Ballypreen, where, to his delight, local residents John and Mary O'Farrell had named a pub in his honor. They stopped in the pub for a pint of Guinness. Due to the O'Farrells' need for space for their family, the pub closed for business in June of 2004. 20 years after President and Mrs. Reagan visited, the contents were saved and shipped to the Reagan Library, where they were placed inside the Air Force One Pavilion, which was under construction at the time. Now, guests to the Reagan Museum can enjoy good old Irish hospitality in the same wonderful surroundings of a vintage Irish pub. It's the same bar, the same signage, and the same taps from President Reagan's 1984 visit. As you leave the pavilion and re-enter the main museum, you'll enter our Rebuilding America gallery. President Reagan inherited a country in the midst of a disastrous recession, with sky-high interest rates, out-of-control inflation, massive unemployment, and other problems that tested America's resolve. He was determined to bring about recovery by liberating the native energy, ingenuity, and entrepreneurial spirit of the American people. He began to work on changing our nation's economic policies. Want to learn about these economic policies, but in a fun and engaging way? Visitors of all ages will have fun with our 9 different games awaiting you at our interactive game table. President Reagan's core economic plans are explored in 9 interactive game apps. As visitors complete the 9 apps, a 12-foot by 5-foot map of a fictional American town projected on the tabletop dynamically changes. As the United States grew more prosperous at home, it still faced the challenge of an expansionist, oppressive, totalitarian system abroad, specifically international communism and the threat of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. In our next galleries, you'll learn more about the Berlin Wall, the threat of communism, and the dictators our world faced in the 1980s. President Reagan's courage as a leader, skill as a diplomat, and his willingness to confront communism around the world played a major role in ending the domination of the Soviet Union. He developed and applied with constant purpose a strategy not simply to contain communism, but to end it, and he achieved this goal across most of the globe. Welcome to our Peace Through Strength Gallery. Ronald Reagan came to the leadership of the free world with a new strategy for securing peace and transcending communism. Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev transformed relations between the United States and the Soviet Union at 4 summits: in Geneva, Switzerland, Reykjavik, Iceland, Washington, D.C., and Moscow, the USSR. Between November 1985 and May of 1988, they signed the 2 historic treaties on exhibit in this gallery, including the INF Treaty, negotiated dramatic reductions in nuclear arms, and began to bring the Cold War to an end. This gallery also contains the suit President Reagan wore, along with his cufflinks and tie tack, while delivering his famous Tear Down This Wall speech in 1987. A selection of his speech cards are also on display. Ronald Reagan made a point of honoring American heroes in ceremonies at the White House and on many other occasions. His State of the Union addresses began a tradition of extending the nation's gratitude to ordinary citizens who met extraordinary challenges. This gallery tells the stories of these and other such heroes from yesterday and today. Heroes in this gallery include those who lost their lives when the Challenger exploded, veterans of World War II who scaled the cliffs on D-Day, and even the 343 New York firefighters who passed away while trying to save lives on 9/11. To honor their memory, this 14-foot structural beam, a remnant from the North Tower of the World Trade Center, is on display. Throughout his life, Ronald Reagan loved the great outdoors. He bought his first ranch property in the 1940s, and over the years, Nancy Reagan grew to enjoy the pace of life on the family's ranches. During their years in the White House, a trip to Rancho del Cielo or a weekend at the presidential compound at Camp David gave President and Mrs. Reagan precious time together. Both retreats also gave Ronald Reagan a chance to enjoy one of his great passions, riding a horse. Visitors to the Reagan Library can not only learn more about President Reagan's 2 retreats, but they can view some of the saddles and belt buckles President Reagan received while in office, and even ride a horse with Ronald Reagan in the hills of Rancho del Cielo. After President Reagan left office, he kept up an active schedule of speeches and public events. In our post-presidential gallery, we celebrate Citizen Reagan by highlighting some of the awards and gifts he received following his time in the White House, including a surfboard from the students at Pepperdine University in Malibu following his first post-presidential speech, and the Congressional Gold Medal. This gallery also contains a letter President Reagan wrote to the American people on November 5, 1994, announcing he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. President Ronald Wilson Reagan died on Saturday, June 5, 2004, with his wife and family at his side. His final struggle and death was both personal and international, a private burden for him and his family, and a tragedy that hundreds of millions of people felt a part of. This gallery showcases the week that surrounded his passing, from laying in repose at the Reagan Library, where over 118,000 people came to pay their respects in a 36-hour period, to laying in state at the U.S. Capitol, to his services at the National Cathedral, and finally his interment ceremony at the Reagan Library, his final resting place.
Thank you for joining our virtual tour of the Reagan Museum. We hope we inspired you to come visit us once our doors are reopened. We encourage you to share this virtual tour with your family and friends. For those of you who have students now at home, we recommend that you visit our website at reaganlibrary.com to see our dozens and dozens of different curriculum and resource ideas for parents, teachers, and students. You can find them all on our website right under our Education tab. And until these shelter-at-home restrictions are lifted, we just ask that you please stay safe, stay healthy, and to pray for those in need.
There is no instant cure, but there is a cure. With your help and your prayers, we'll find it. I'll be back next Saturday. Thank you, and God bless you.